In this video, I discuss elves in Dungeons & Dragons. Welcome to my channel. I focus on tabletop role-playing games, video games, and science fiction. Of all the races described in the player's handbook, elves are probably the most bigoted. And what I mean by that, let's quote from page 23. Haughty but gracious. Although they can be haughty, elves are generally gracious even to those who fall short of their high expectations, which is most non-elves. Still, they can find good in just about anyone. So they do find good in people, but there's that. But then you take a look, when you go over and you look at the description of half-elves, because let's see, this one, that's on page 38. And the description is at top of page 39. Half-elves have no lands of their own, though they are welcome in human cities and somewhat less welcome in elven forests. So you take a look at this, and then the interesting thing is you look at the descriptions of all the different kinds of elves. So you have high elves, you have wood elves, and you have dark elves or drow. And even the high elves, you have the gray elves of Greyhawk and the high elves of Greyhawk. And then you have the Sylvanesti, I don't know if I pronounced that great, of Dragonlance versus the Qualinesti of Dragonlance, and you have the Moon Elves and the Sun Elves. They're broken down and into different subgroups, and the same thing is true with the Wood Elves, and perhaps even true of the Drow, but that's not well documented. But each of them has a separate description based upon the way they look. They are very conscious of style and looks. This is the thing that makes them prejudiced, because they dislike those outside their sets of norms. Their standards of elegance and beauty mean that, like, the dwarves are dull and clumsy oafs, and humans just don't meet up to their standards, and their standards are very, very clannish, except they don't have clans. They have separate groups, which are sub-races, or what would be called racial today. If we compared them today, in today's world, they would be racists, because they don't they don't associate with outside of their main group. You have the high elves, each their clan of one clan of high elf doesn't associate with other clans of high elf because they're racially distinct. They don't do that, and the way they don't allow half elves to integrate with their society, because you don't ever hear a description of something that's a half elf, half high elf, half wood elf. That's not in the rules, where it doesn't describe that. So those are rare to almost non-existent. So the wood elves and the high elves don't interbreed. They don't intermix. Why? They live 700 years, but they are racially separated by choice, because both can interbreed with humans. So you would assume that they can interbreed between themselves, but they keep separate. So you have to keep that in mind if you're going to play the elf in Dungeons and Dragons. You are very cautious about your relationships with other elves, unless they're of your same kin. You don't really have much association with them. You have sort of disdain. That's what I'm reading into the rules from the examples and everything that they they speak. They're the same people separated by a common language, as they said, the difference between English and British, that they can read and write Elvish, but they probably have differences in intonation and differences in cadence and the differences in pronunciation of the various words. So you would have the difference between a wood elf and a high elf and between them and a drow. Though they all speak Elvish, they are all very different, and they are cliquish, I guess is the better term, because they don't associate. And there's obviously some dalliances with humans, because otherwise how do half-elves come into the picture? But the interesting question is that the half-elves are never described. They're described as having any lands they're associated with. They're grudgingly accepted into the humans a bit more than the elves. But where do half-elves grow up? Because they mature slower than humans, and you have the elves who can take 100 years to reach maturity. So that gets into some interesting things. Also brings up interesting questions that what is pedophilia as far as the elves are concerned? Because if you had a human find a 75-year-old elf and wanted to have a dalliance with that character, is that pedophilia in the eyes of the elves? Though the character's 75 years old. It does get into some weird standards that you have to think about when you're dealing with that, because unlike dwarves, there's no description of a half-dwarf. So dwarves and humans don't interact in that way, but dwarves and humans do, because you end up with half-elves. So where do half-elves come from? Well, they obviously come from a human and an elf having relations. But the descriptions are that the half-elves are not really accepted, so that they're outsiders from the elves. They're disdained. There's an implied disdain for that. So with elves, you can sort of read into this that humans are good enough to have sex with, but not good enough to have children with, or good enough to not to that you reject the offspring. And this, because that's why half-elves don't have homes. So you run into this. So elves are very bigoted, from what I'm reading in this. This will be an interesting one to get some comments on, because you take a look at what it says about elves, that they're very graceful, they're very attractive, they are the beautiful people. They remind me of, shall we say, the cliques that you see in Hollywood, where unless you're part of the beautiful people, they really don't want to associate with you. Do you have their style and their grace and their money? But the elves, they disdain the dwarves because they dig in the dirt and mine things. The Player's Handbook talks about that they don't do their own mining. They trade to get the metals that they use to make things, but they don't sully their hands. They're disdainful. They're haughty. And so they're very prejudiced. They are the in-clique, the Hollywood-esque types that would only want things their way. They don't want things, and they don't want to associate with those lower cretins that would dare to be non-elvish. So thank you for listening to my discussion of elves. I look forward to learning what you think about this video. I may upset some people with my comments about elves in this one. Let me know in the comments below. I look forward to reading your comments, both pros and cons. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. I appreciate both. If you'd like to subscribe, you can click on my icon on the left, or there should be some links to some other content on the right. Thank you.